All right, folks, it's another lovely day here in Durham, North Carolina. And of course, we've got all kinds of things going on. People are dealing with the pandemic, the vaccines, and of course, people are definitely paying attention to the weather. We had thunderstorms a couple of days ago, and I know that they moved up to the northeast around New York, New Jersey. So Fred and I think Henry and some of the other storms were heading up in that general direction, but I don't think we've got any threat anytime soon, even though it is that season, hurricane season. So there's no telling what they'll come up with or what names they would give them, even though those are oftentimes pre planned and all of that. So I know that they've got whatever the next letters are planned out, but only they have not revealed them to me. Like I said, I'm sure that the weatherman knows who they are, but I don't know what they are and all of that. So that being the case, it's always great to have amazing conversations and folks to join us. And of course, I've met people from all kinds of sources, every place from Clubhouse, which is a fantastic app, to definitely Potted and a number of other sources as well. So it's always great bringing in new guests and learning about what they've got going on in their life. And I know that I've had friends from different parts of the world. As a matter of fact, I did a conversation earlier with a young lady in the wellness space who is from none other than London. And she actually lives in London, but is from one of the African nations in terms of some of her roots and all of that, but it's very much about wellness and all of that. And I know that every morning I do the news program with Steve Rao, who is running for Morrisville City Council, but is of Indian descent and all of that. So we do our morning program every morning from 10 to 11. And of course, we bring people from around the globe, like Shaquille Latimer out of Australia. I believe he has some Indian descent as well. And then, of course, we bring in Sasha Starr, originally from Russia, but now living in Canada. And sometimes Rakesh comes in from New Zealand. And of course, one of the founders comes in as well, the founders of International Broadcast Media, that being Nick Palveda. So we have all of this conversation going on. But today I am having the pleasure of having Harbrit Kang in with me and everything. So looking forward to having a conversation with her. We were actually talking off stage and she was explaining to me that a lot of time those Indian names have meaning. So it's always great to hear what those meanings are and all of that. So I'd love for her to share what Harvard means and share a little bit about herself and everything. Because like I said, it's just a truly wonderful environment and we love meeting new folks. And of course, that smile is just effervescent. So we love seeing that great smile as well. So Harvard, if you would just share a little bit about the meaning and also a little bit about yourself as well.
Thank you, Mark, and very good morning to California there. It's midnight nearly here in India, and I
Wow.
think all that storm and rain that you talked about, no wonder we both showed up in gray, huh? Okay, so my name is Harpreet, which is, as I said, it goes into two syllables. Har is everyone, like literally everyone,
Right.
and Preet stands for love. So when you arrive at my book, I think I've finally sort of arrived after all those years of struggling to understand who I was. Okay, I'm sorry. Did you want me to put in something else there?
No, I was learning to learn more about the book and definitely, a lot of times people, and I know in our culture and definitely being here in North Carolina and everything, I know a lot of times we actually get worried about therapy. And I know that sometimes, particularly in the African American society, we oftentimes don't try to. Well, sometimes we have a hard enough time going to our regular doctors, and you add therapy to it, and we're going like, no, don't want to go to a therapist because it has certain stereotypes associated with it. So I know that definitely sometimes certain cultures will be afraid of going to therapy. So I just wondering your thoughts about that because I do know that sometimes we get a little bit too petrified by the whole concept of therapy, and that's part of what your space is about.
Okay, so the book it starts with life and challenges that we face every day, and then it moves on to what I would rather call spirituality rather than
Right,
therapy.
right.
So I am not a connoisseur to comment about therapists. I'm not sure which ones you've tried, Mark, and which ones were good or bad. Um, but alternative therapy has done very well in this part of the world, including China. I mean, most of the Eastern world, alternative therapy like sujok and acupressure and acupuncture and all those things have remarkable results, and I'm sure probably they have in the West as well. I understand a lot more chiro practitioners now in US and so forth. All the same, I would not be the right person to comment on it.
No, like I said, I just wanted to get just, I know that sometimes people have that kind of thought just about it, but I agree that a lot of times that when it comes to spirituality, that's actually what I consider myself to be more of. I know that a lot of times people love certain religions, certain philosophies, and things of that nature. I know that in my own life, I've sometimes found that too often certain institutions, not all institutions, I find the Eastern institutions do better in my mind, but certain institutions get too caught up in the personality and not the actual message. So I actually love when people tell me that they are more spiritual than, say, religious, because I would consider myself in that same category, because I'm one of those people that's a student of all aspects of life. So like I said, being a journalist, but also just being a student of life, I always love getting different philosophies and reading from different philosophers. So that's one of the things that I enjoy doing, and I wish that more people did that, even some of those that are maybe are in religious institutions. But I know that for me personally, I love having those conversations where I dig deep into myself, my well-being, and its relationship to the entire universe. And it sounds like that's a lot of what your book is about, and what you're trying to do, as well as getting us to examine ourselves internally.
I resonate a lot with you, Mark, and most of everything you've just said. I personally think if there are 7 or 8 billion people, whatever we are right now, we should probably have the same number of religions, because there's no way that somebody walked a path and you can go and walk exactly the same footsteps.
Right.
It's kind of criminal to get to understand that somebody discovered a path for himself or herself, and there's no way you can even climb a mountain, never mind an entire spiritual journey over your lifetime to follow somebody through. Yes, I hear you when you say spirituality is another bit. And well, what do you say? It's difficult to fathom God, isn't it? Mostly, I would say God is impossible, because you have utility for everything, from a cushion cover to a tissue paper box to anything and everything, except God has no utility. Now, to try and spend a lifetime searching for something with a lot of blind faith, I would say, which doesn't really come handy on an everyday basis, is kind of blind. So it's not an easy one. I hear you, and very few people therefore follow that. I don't know.
No, I
Would you
agree
like
with
me
you.
to
I agree with
talk
you.
more
A lot of
about?
people, a lot of people don't follow that, and they just kind of like go along the path and everything. But you also, and I had a friend of mine that did his late in life. I mean, he was actually talking about it. My friend Rufus Stevens, who is a motivational speaker, but I know he was talking about his brother, and I think I want to say it's a twin brother that went skydiving and all of that. So one of the things that I was curious about when I read about some of your history is the fact that you are involved in a lot of things, both as an entrepreneur, as an author, but also as a pilot. So I kind of want to get into the pilot life as well. So I want to know, what made you decide that you wanted to fly an airplane, and how did you get involved in that? Because I know a lot of times in certain cultures, it's not even encouraged for women to be flying or be pilots, but it also sounds like you don't necessarily follow the path that maybe people want to give you and everything along those lines. So definitely I want to touch on a lot of things about your life, but one of them that really struck me was the fact that you were a pilot.
Yes, Mark. I'm not very stereotyped. I hear you. Okay, so it's not just being a pilot. I think I started gliding before I became a pilot.
Oh, wow.
And I went on to represent these 4 states, then went to nationals for competitions. And we were doing a glider without any engine. So that's what glider is essentially. But it's kind of risky, way more riskier than being a pilot, because being a pilot, you have an engine in your hand and a lot of control. With a glider, I did a lot of emergency landings. Once my wing literally crashed over my hangar. So it did not crash, but I mean, it was a touch and brush and go. But then I was always that spirit. I thought I did bungee jumping and parasailing and I used to drive big bikes most of my life. And I think eventually now I look at it in the hindsight, not to mention I was a crime journalist for about half a dozen years. Uh, and been at gunpoint and lots of times would go down to jails and talk to criminals and stuff. When I look at all of that in the hindsight, I think it's something that drove me where I am. It was very good to take that jump without and being so reckless and not really caring too much about life. It's so much of letting go in spirituality, as we call it, and not holding on or clinging on to too many things. So adventure sports taught me that early, and a lot of types of journalism that I ventured into for nearly a decade, I think I would say was instrumental or triggered off understanding a lot of people, their lives, their challenges, what they went through, and helping you see through those experiences. Because otherwise, we wait for us to get those experiences till we begin to follow the path, as we call it, and that helped me kind of double speed it. Perhaps I'm not sure, but that's how I look at it now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so much of our life journey, we sometimes get caught up in this attitude of letting others dictate our attitudes and what we should go after. And it sounds to me, as I've read about your history and as I've actually, now even talking to you now, it seems like you're one of those people that's not going to let somebody discourage you because of their attitudes. And I know that even myself, I have been guilty of sometimes not going for jobs, not going for careers, so sometimes even not going for social environments and everything, because I let myself be self-defeated, let myself defeat myself before I even got involved in whatever that situation was, whether that was a job, or whether that was a relationship, or whether that was whatever was going on in my life, maybe even a friendship or a business colleague and things along those lines. So I guess one of the questions that I'm curious about is, what about you and your personality and maybe even your spirituality drives you in order to get past those self-doubts? Because we all have self-doubts. I don't care who you are and everybody. And of course, you've done a lot in your life, but we all have self-doubts. And we also always have our people that give us the nose, that are always trying to discourage us and things of that nature. So it's a two-part thing. We have our self-doubt in ourselves, and we also have those that are like, the no people that, you could tell them the greatest thing in the world and how you can do it and everything, and they want to discourage you. And sometimes those people can even come from in our own families, our own cultures, our own whatever. So as one that has a go-getter spirit and everything, how have you dealt with that? Because I'm sure that even you, whether you were doing it as a glider or whether you were doing it as a debater or even as an entrepreneur, have had both the internal self-doubt as well as maybe people in your family or in your circle that were like, you can't do that.
I hear you, Mark. Totally. This might be a little long answer, so bear with me.
No problem.
Okay. So basically, the people who push our buttons are usually the ones who are very close to us.
Right.
I mean, if an outsider tells you something, or someone you meet on the street, you're not going to bother with what they say. You couldn't care less. So when that happens, usually these are emotional visitors, whatever they are. I call them visitors because it's either anger or anxiety or fear or panic or whatever that is. I call it a visitor primarily because it doesn't last. It comes, it stays for a while. It could be 20 minutes, 20 days, 20 hours, whatever it is, anger, frustration, anything. And then it goes. That's something that I noticed pretty early on in my path. It's this understanding that it's a visitor. It's not permanent. It's something that comes and it goes. So as you begin to discover yourself, and I use the word self like in capitals and bold here, as in the true self, not the mind and body package that I talk about. Also, because mind and body is also temporary. We have this very clear understanding that what you're seeing here right now, this package, was not here a little while ago and will not be here after some time. So we understand that it's temporary, and we understand that every baby, even if there is a reincarnation, comes with zero knowledge. So whatever we're accumulating here is not coming back. So both those processes are temporary. And therefore, when you Okay, am I bemusing you there? Have I lost you a
No,
little bit?
no,
I
you
see a
didn't lose
very
me at all. You just said something that I was going to clarify and maybe get you to clarify on as well, because of the look, that perplexed look and everything was. I know that when I have talked to friends of mine that have believed in reincarnation, or believed in the thought that we do come back from another journey. And I know that some of that is in Eastern philosophy as well, not strictly Eastern, because there are some Western philosophies that have that same belief. But I have heard people believe that part of what your past life is does come back in some form. So I think that's what the perplexed look was, because I know that when I've talked to friends, they've been like, they have done what do they call it, retrotherapy, where they've seen some of their past lives, or they believe that they've seen some of their past lives, and they feel that they have maybe learned some of the lessons learned. Now, when I heard you just say is that, it's like a total rebirth and everything. So I guess you can't really learn from the past life based on what you just said, and that's why I gave that perplexed look.
fair enough, totally. Though now, for the past decade or two, there are so many medically practicing doctors who are, now talking about this. Many Lives, Many Masters, one of the books where scientifically doctors have done past life regressions and moved into it. But that is something that we are not talking about the regular mind and body package, just you and me. We don't do that.
Right.
That's hypnotically done and then taken and then, sorted out. So it's a different diversion. I'm not saying here whether there is or there is no past life, or there is or no reincarnation. I'm saying if there is, we know that the baby comes with zero knowledge. So
Gotcha.
we understand that whatever the mind accumulates, and that the body, A, is temporary and B, is continuously changing. So from ever since your body's been changing, it was
Right.
growing, then it's aging, and from ever since your mind was developing, and then it's evolving. So it's a changing process. Whereas when you talk about I, the consciousness inside, it's always been there. It's
Right.
permanent, right? For
Yeah.
those of the viewers here in your on your channel who meditate or even do any breath work, and the moment they stop the mind chatter and the body begins to go light, they understand that the mind and body have vanished, but the existence is there.
Gotcha.
That's your consciousness, right?
Gotcha.
So that's the self that I refer to. And when that sheds the mind and body, and the understanding of self dawns upon us, then we move on from that understanding or revelation of truth in an everyday journey to take on a day after day. And when these emotions that you talked about visit us, you can be in awareness of them. You
Right.
understand that they're only a role that you're playing, and the engagements that you have and their visitors are temporary. So it's easy to sort of sit and look at them, or even invite them to your heart and say, come, anger, sit, have a cup of coffee or whatever, chill, and then after a while I know you're going to leave.
And
As a
actually, we have
result,
a listener that had a question, and I was going to bring that up and everything. They were actually liking my question the last time, but Amretta was saying that some people are so aware of, irrespective to any age, and they wanted to know if you had any perspective in regards to that. So I guess they're saying that some people are more self-aware, is what it sounds like they're saying and everything. But I didn't know if you had any comments to what Amretta was saying as well, because that's what their question was.
are you saying am I in awareness? Is that the question? I'm
Is they say that
sorry
some
because
people
I
are so
lost you in
aware,
between.
I guess, irrespective to their age. So maybe they're more aware of like some of their history and but some of their past history. And if I can just add something to this, and this is a thought to kind of go to what Amretta was saying, is I remember that I have no kids of my own, but I have two nephews. And I remember that when they were little, I mean, very little, like babies, my dad would take them on trips and things of that nature. And he would point out, things in nature, things in, around them, whether it's animals, whether it's plants, and whether it's things of that nature. I'm sure that some of our friends and some of our relatives may have thought that that was too early, because he was doing this like when they were like, practically crawling on the ground and everything. And I know that sometimes even people talk about hearing music or listening to music when the baby is in the womb, and how that impacted them as musicians and things of that nature. So I think the philosophy that my dad had is, let's get them engaged in education early on. But I do know that some scientists believe that the brain isn't developed enough until a certain age, and they encourage people not to do that kind of introspective kind of work at such a young age. I personally think that you should do it as soon as the baby is conceived, but that's just my thoughts. But I was wondering your thoughts, because I have heard some people say that, maybe the brain isn't developed enough to be bringing thoughts to them at such a young age.
Out of the ancient Indian history, there are two very lucid examples.
Right.
One is of Ashtavakra, the sage who wrote the Ashtavakra Gita, and other is of Abhimanyu, who wrote who was instrumental in explaining what Bhagavad Gita is, the very sermon of it.
Okay.
And both of them are so explained that they learned their main philosophy of their life in the womb of their mother.
Wow.
Now, that's we're talking 5,000, 3,000 years ago, so I will not be in a right place to comment on that. Right. All the same, I think there's enough evidence now scientifically of mothers who are relaxed and not stressed out and have easier births and deliveries and happier state of mind. Well, obviously, the baby is a part of the mother, while, and then there are other mothers who've been through a very stressful pregnancy, and the children also have traumatic experiences. That much is already established, Mark. It's nothing that I would probably personally add to that, but I'm just quoting as a secondary opinion.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And like I said, it looks like Amrita was adding to that, saying that some kids are also old souls and apparently are aware of the past. And they were asking, do you think it has to do they were bringing up the concept of karma, because they were asking about past lives and karma as well. So I know that is one of the Eastern philosophies more than a Western philosophy, but definitely we hear people talking about karma even here in the States and everything. We even heard people talking about the karma of certain past presidents, but we'll just leave it at that.
Certainly. My response to her would be that if you believe that your God is fair and you have a fair God somewhere and there's balance in the universe, then it cannot be that one is born in the palace and the other is born on the street. There's got to be something in the past that carries it forward. It can be that somebody's born with extreme 160 IQ and the other one is sitting in the back bench, lagging behind. It can be for nothing that we're born with these so many areas and the world looks unfair. I also noticed something else, Mark, which makes me think about this very often, that I'm sure you might resonate with, and so would everybody else. When you meet people for the first time, sometimes, not everybody, some of them just strike across like you know them and you just know them. Or other times, and some people you like at sight and others you hate at sight. Yes. No matter how often people tell you that, no, he's a wonderful human being, you just hate them at sight, or other way around. Right. So it makes me wonder if it has something to do with your past lives with them. Because the self or the consciousness is intuitive. And it's all the time, having this vibe that it's feeling. It's just the mind and the body which is limited. And so much entrapped with the illusions around us.
No, I definitely agree with you on that and everything. And I couldn't agree with you more, because there have been times that I have met friends that and it actually becomes almost a dilemma. And I'll explain what that dilemma is. There are friends that I have met that I knew had a connective force, meaning that I knew that we would be friends or connections of some sort or another. And I was able to perceive that part of the friendship, but the nature of the friendship, I wasn't able to quite ascertain. And like I said, part of it might be my gifts and other people's gifts and everything. So I would be able to ascertain in meeting the person that there would be a friendship and a relationship. And I might even share that with them, but I was never quite clear as to what the nature of that friendship would be or how far the friendship would go. So it's like I knew that there was a connection, but I didn't quite understand in my mind what that connection was. And it was usually a positive connection. There are some cases, like you mentioned before, that I knew that there was a connection and it was like a a negative connection. And sometimes you might even go into those relationships feeling the negative, but you feel that you can get past those negatives, and that never works. Because like I said, the negative comes out at some point or another, and that kind of like oil and water doesn't work, kind of like happens. And you're going like, I knew that I should have put my oil and the water together when I know that that's going to be a very bad situation. But sometimes you just get thrown into that.
Super. I totally hear you and resonate with you. I think we all go through those experiences. And yes, you have it. You have it there. There you go.
Right. And by the way, we had another listener that was watching. I think they were watching off of YouTube as well, and they were just saying that they had a great question, that they thought I gave a great question on reincarnation, and that you gave a beautiful answer. And they said that they were in love with this conversation already, so they're already enjoying what we're talking about and all of that. So that is great to hear that they are enjoying our kind of free-flowing conversation, because that's the way I do all of the conversations in general and everything. I guess to kind of switch it, but also keep it maybe in the same realm and everything. How do you blend your philosophical, spiritual journey with being an entrepreneur? Because you are an entrepreneur, and I know that sometimes we want to incorporate that into our journeys, whether that's the sports things that you were talking about earlier with gliding, or being an entrepreneur, or even being a debater. So I was just wondering how you blend the two together, because I know a lot of times we always hear the great entrepreneurs talking about their spiritual or religious connection in one form or fashion or another, but they don't always leave the life that they say they're leaving in terms of their entrepreneurial journey and their spiritual journey. So I was just wondering, how do you blend the two together? Because sometimes they seem like they might almost go against each other, but I always feel that you need to have your spirituality in everything. I know that I did an interview not that long ago with a gentleman from Australia, but he had also done some work in Africa with the elephants and conservation. And I was telling him that in my mind, we are all four aspects of our personality, meaning the physical, the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual. And sometimes I don't think that we give enough credence to all four of what we are about as individuals. So I'd love to hear your thoughts as to how you blend it all together when you're doing your various works.
Fair enough, Mark. So I think I've been lucky with that, because what we do is me and my husband, we run a group of colleges. And part of that is being a mentor, whether it is with the faculty or with the students. And I teach actively and I mentor actively. So one part of that is it beautifully gels with my spiritual journey. It's easy for me to sort of be a life coach to a lot of people in that profession. B, yes, it wasn't always.
Oops,
Okay, I think we blinked. Are you still there?
I'm still here.
Okay.
Yes.
Sure.
So, yeah, you were
Right.
sharing a little bit
So the
about
second
the
one-
work with your husband in the school, and that's when it kind of like did that little glitch.
Mhm. Right. The second one is what I explained earlier. Now, over the past 10 or dozen years or a decade, I have learned to step back. So I told you, when an emotion comes, whatever it is, I don't engage.
Wow.
I let it sit. I don't get swayed into a rage or anything anymore. So whatever the situation is, and it's much easier because we understand essentially that a troubled mind, or a mind which is driven by ego, is very scattered. It's not focused. While a relaxed mind is can focus very easily, and you can stay relaxed when you don't engage with any of those emotions that a business throws at you, or people, because essentially it's an HR thing when you run colleges, which people throw at you because it's services. So that essentially helps me. When I don't engage, then I can step back and then take a decision and go forward. So it's been pretty easy for the past few years, I would say. It wasn't always easy, I must admit. Neither was my spiritual journey.
And that's
10
what
years
you're
back,
speaking of not engaging. When you were covering the crimes and the criminal element, I imagine, because my brother has actually worked with at-risk youth. I have friends that are in police forces. I have a cousin that's actually a Georgia Bureau of Investigation officer. So I know that sometimes we want to cut off what's going on, and a lot of that is that negative space because criminals are involved in that space and everything. So when you were actually engaged as a reporter and covering crime, how did you do that disconnect? Because I'm even imagining that even in your family life, there were times that you had to disconnect when you were covering some very horrendous crimes. Because I imagine that these were some horrendous crimes that you covered as well. So I was just wondering, how did you manage the disconnect? Because I'm thinking that, you didn't want to bring that, just like a police officer doesn't want to bring that home. I'm thinking that definitely a crime reporter doesn't want to bring that home as well. So how did you make that disconnect, and how did you get away from that? Because that's something that I'm oftentimes puzzled about, is how you can even do that disconnect when you're covering such things.
I didn't, Mark. I think I gave up journalism about a dozen years back and came full time to my business. Um, I didn't. I couldn't. And I must say, I used to cry. I used to very often. I remember covering a riot scene in the hospitals, and a pregnant woman lost her baby who was a part of the riot scene.
Right.
And I was carrying my second baby, and I sat down and cried with her on the ground. And there were other times when I would have been in crime scenes, and I covered a train being burnt with several charred bodies, which looked like small babies. And there are days when I remember just entering the door of my house and lying on the floor, hugging the earth and crying it out. And I used to feel it like I was very empathetic always. Probably that's what has helped me move further. And I would really feel everyone's pain very strongly until I learned to detach myself, because I understood that if I couldn't detach, I couldn't help people.
Right.
I used to myself get swayed with it. And no, I didn't. I was very much a part of it, very much a part of it. And my stories, which I wrote, were very passionate.
Right.
I would have a lot of emotional tinge go into it. I'm have to guilty,
Well,
absolutely guilty.
yeah, I can understand that. And how do you, even to this day, even in the academic space and everything, deal with being having that empathic personality? Because I know that friends of mine have recognized that about myself. It can help with the interviews, but it can also sometimes hurt relationships. It can hurt other things as well. So I was just wondering, how do you balance being an empath or having that empathic personality with day-to-day life? Because I know that sometimes I even wrestle with that sometimes, because I definitely feel sympathy for people when they're going through things, and definitely try to be empathic. And actually a lot of that is just my natural calling, my natural abilities or whatever. So I was just wondering, how do you have that balance as well? Because I know a lot of times you want to be empathetic, you want to help people, but sometimes you also put some of that weight on your shoulders, and it doesn't need to be on your shoulders as an empathetic personality. So I was wondering your thoughts about that as well.
Well, being empathetic, one thing is that I love communicating. So whether it was journalism or it was being a teacher or even an entrepreneur where you were talking to people all day, but more importantly, the students. I think empathy is wonderful when you're dealing with students. I don't know how to say it better, or if I need to unpack that. And it's been such a pleasure dealing with students, both one-on-one and in the class. A lot of one of the classes that I take up for the first 6 months of a master's program that my students come in is communication, and most of it is intra-communication inside, rather than what you talk to businesses outside or what you talk to another person outside. Because when you look at it, most of the misunderstandings that we have are based off the fact that we were not clear with what we wanted.
Right.
And that, yes, that doesn't begin till you begin to understand yourself. I'm going back to self in many ways from the beginning. And it's a beautiful experience. I have to say this, both for journalism and for teaching. I don't remember a single day I've worked. Honestly, it's been like every day you get up and you want to go to work, and it's such a pleasure. And you get paid at the end of the month. What more can you ask for? It's like it's a beauty of the whole thing.
It is a beautiful thing. And by the way, Stephanie Pearson, who is a longtime friend, I've known her and her husband, who is an artist for many years. She was saying that how do you turn off the empathetic feelings? Because they find it difficult. So they were actually wondering how you even manage to turn off that empathetic feelings, because sometimes they want to turn it off and they can't turn it off. So that's the question was they asking, was how to turn it off. In if you had any suggestions or any ideas based on your own life as to ways to turn it off.
Yeah. And in fact, I've talked about this in my book as well. And I was referring to it earlier, Stephanie. Thank you for the question. So, uh, see, when I said we could look at your, you can look at your emotions, you're aware of it, you're present to when they visit you. It's so much easier to then step back, you know and now I notice over the past few years that I can, when I need to say something to somebody, let's say I need to correct someone at work, uh, I know exactly when to step forward, say precisely what I need to say, and then step back. And never do I have what I used to have earlier, like a regret that I've said too much, or my pitch was too high, or my tone was bad. Because you're in awareness, when you're present to yourself, to what is happening, and you're not getting engaging in that role, you understand it's a role that you're playing, then it's easy. So you keep stepping back. And honestly, Stephanie, to add to that, it wasn't always as simple as that. So, like about a half a dozen years back, I remember putting up snoozes. I
Mm.
used to have like a dozen snoozes on my phone saying, step back, don't over engage. So it was a conscious remembering that this is not what you are. So remember what you are and keep stepping back, and then looking at life all the time as you play it. And I used to have these pin-ups and uh, on my desk and on my notice board and everywhere on my desktop, so that I remember it. And it took me a while to gain that understanding of the truth, as we call it, because it is the truth. Uh, in the Eastern philosophy, we call this the Maya. Everything that is not is called the Maya. That's how we define it. So everything that is temporary, which will vanish, including the mountains and the planets, Pluto's gone already, or whatever, um, is temporary. It's called Maya. It's an illusion. It's now there, will not be there. Maybe after a few thousand years, or maybe tomorrow. It doesn't matter. And when you keep that in your understanding, when you live every day out there, it takes a while to get there. But then once you're through, once this thing has dawned upon you as information, and you've submitted and surrendered to that understanding of it, then you make ways. I'm sure you'll find ways and support systems and friends to have conversations to lead you that way. I
No,
hope that helps. If
no, that definitely helps, and I'm sure that Ms. Pearson would agree with that as well. I was actually going back over some of the other notes that some of the other folks had brought up as well. So I know that Amrita said that they felt that kids are most aware beings, and this whole life depends on faith. And I definitely agree with that concept, that the life depends on faith and everything. And definitely, they also said, I'm sure she listens conscious there as well. And I think they also were giving you credit for one of your brilliant management tips. And Miss Pearson definitely did come back with a reply and said, thank you. Repetitive reminders is a good way to do that. So definitely those repetitive reminders are a great way. So Miss Pearson was definitely agreeing with that. One of the things I was curious about in the academic environment is I've got friends that are online teachers, and even some that are professors here in Durham. I know some people at Duke, North Carolina Central University, and other places. But some of them were already prepared for what was going on in the pandemic and education, because they had already been doing it earlier. They were already doing online education, but a lot of others were not prepared. So they were definitely caught kind of off guard when they had to go virtual and everything. So I was just wondering how you dealt with that over the last year. And if I know that definitely in India, y'all are still under some very tight restrictions. Things are loosening it up here in the United States, but there's also the Delta variant, which I know impacted y'all some time back. So we may be going backwards, just like y'all went backwards a couple of times as well. But I was just wondering your thoughts about being prepared as an academic when we went into this pandemic environment. Because as I'm seeing you and as I'm having this conversation, I can see you being the kind of professor that likes to be there with your students and engaging with them in person. I'm thinking that you are right with the virtual, but I'm getting this impression that you prefer the in-person kind of variation where you can actually feel one-on-one from the students or one-on group from the students that you can get to some degree from this virtual environment, but it's not the same thing. Let's be honest about it, and things of that nature. So I was just wondering how you coped with it and how you adjusted, and even excuse me, how I think you said your husband was in that same space of academic as well. So how he adjusted as well. So I was just curious how the two of you adjusted in this whole space, because it has definitely been a challenge for many of us. And I'm actually involved in the arts as well. So I've noticed some of my venues that I've been part of, including the Carolina Theater that I'm on the board of, are just now reopening. And some of them have not reopened at all, or they're opening on a limited basis. But I was just wondering how you've been able to cope.
Yes, Mark, I hear you. And it's been a tough time for everybody. I empathize with that. So, one thing that spirituality trains you is to go with the flow. Whatever comes, you accept it gracefully and you go with the flow. I don't think it was as easy for everyone else as it was for me or those who are not in the same bent of mind. So, I remember the first lockdown we had. It was not easy for the students, as I just said. We have 45 countries on the campus, and a lot of students were stuck up here. They could not even step out of their boarding houses or guest houses or wherever they were living. And I remember the international officer would call me, and because I've been a sort of a life coach, and she would ask me to talk to some of them over the phone. After 2 or 3 conversations, I wrote a piece and sent it out, and over the email to everybody, so that if it could, motivate or help people hold on. And after these 2 or 3 pieces, I still remember an Indian child living with his parents in a regular Indian home from pharmaceutics committed suicide. And that time, I wrote a very, as you called me, an empath. I wrote a very, about 4 or 5 chapters, if you would like to call it. And I sent it out to all my present and my alumni as well, thousands of students, in fact. In fact, now when I put it on the hindsight, after that, I never stopped writing. And then I sent this book to my son, who was also in a similar situation in the US, about 70 or 80 pages of it. And he said, why only to your students? And that's how I sent it out to a couple of publishers who were accepting manuscripts. And somebody wanted to publish it. This is fantastic. This is exactly what we need during the pandemic and the lockdown, because it directly sort of relates to all the problems that people are looking at. But let me go back to your question. So a lot of platforms, starting with Google Meet and Zoom and so many out there, Cisco and all, were very helpful to, especially to educational institutions. So we had a lot of platforms to choose from. Also, we did something else which really helped us. For all the programs have a lot of practice, hospitality or hotel management or pharmacy or engineering and all those kind of courses which had practical fashion designing, journalism. We had sort of staggered practical work for them to come in very few in numbers in sanitized labs to work. This was when the first phase was coming down. Now, for the past 4 months, 4 months back, all the faculty had already received a double dose. And then we did 3 massive drives where hundreds of students came in to get vaccinated in the campus. But besides that, we said anybody who has received a vaccination, at least 1 dose, and can show a certificate. So a month back, end of July or beginning of August, we went offline. And those are the people who are now coming in. So we're still looking at a hybrid sort of a system and easing into it. Not everything has gone offline because there are a considerable number of students who are still back at home and haven't had the opportunity to get vaccinated. India is a huge, mind-boggling population, but we've largely got there already. So it's easier now.
Good. I'm glad to see this going much better and everything. I've had some friends that have been from India and other parts of that part of the globe and everything, but I've never been quite sure how it's going. But have y'all been having a lot of conversations with people that are, and this is actually getting away from our usual conversation, but I'll come back to the education aspect. But have y'all been having a lot of folks that have been part of that anti-mask, anti-vaccination crowd? Because I know here we've been having whole discussions around school boards where people are like, nope, don't want to wear the mask and don't want to wear it in whatever. I know that I saw a report about Tennessee. We've actually had it here in the Carolinas. We've had, of course, people that are still very much against the vaccinations, and some of that is because of past history, like in the African American community, some of the past history of past kinds of tests that were administered by the government or administered by the government, and there still being some paranoia and some fears around that and everything. But I'd just love to know is, and I know you can't speak for an entire continent, but in the part of the continent that you are in, have you seen those same kind of conversations, or is this more of a Western kind of thing going on? Because I think that I had read that there had been some protests around masks in parts of India, but I wasn't sure how widespread it was.
Yeah, I've been reading about it in US and talking to my friends who are based out of there. No, it's not as big as that, Mark, but I wouldn't say that there are no people here who resent it. So we had a couple of faculty members on board who did not want to get vaccinated. Eventually, one of them got COVID, so had immunity himself. The other one finally decided to. There was a conversation that was happening, I remember, because everyone else had got vaccinated. And then somebody brought up the fact, a simple fact, that look, when you get a vaccine, it's basically injecting a tiny part of the COVID itself, like to give you immunity.
Yes.
So how does that get you any diseases, which COVID doesn't? It doesn't add up. So I think that convinced her. I'm not sure what convinced her, but she also got it recently. So we kind of 100% through now, but we did not have it as much as the West. It certainly is more in the West. And I think it needs reasoning out and explaining what it is and what it is not. It's more of education there that is required anywhere for that matter, wherever the people are resenting it or revolting against it. Because there are a lot of rumors, and they're here as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And one of the other things I know, like when I do these conversations, I have certain things that are on my mind based on sometimes even shattering stereotypes. And that's one of the things that I was curious about. And I know that a lot of times when we hear about Eastern cultures, we hear of them as not always being as fair toward women and things of that nature. And I know some of that can be some of the other countries like Pakistan and others. But I'm just wondering, is that still something that's prevalent, or do you find it a lot of more independent women like yourself? Because I would definitely consider you, based on our conversation, as being somewhat independent in everything. But I was just wondering, is that still something that is prevalent in the Eastern philosophies? Because I do know that in the past, that's something you would always hear, was that there were still those traditional ways that were still not more patriarchal in terms of the way of society. So I was wondering, is that still as prevalent, or is it that we're seeing more of an independence movement among women in India?
Yes, Mark, you're right over there. And there are still a lot of issues or problems when it comes to women. Within a community or within a city, I would say, it would vary a lot from a working community to an educated family, or how liberal particular society is, or if they are in a big city and most of the people, most of the relatives and the bigger family is educated and aware, as compared to a blue collar job or a rickshaw puller or someone. But also, even in the richer people, societies, I would say, majority of the girls do not get a part of their father's inheritance. It still goes to the boys. And if one of the girl was to fight for it, she would not be looked upon nicely, or she would not be accepted in her family, I would say. It's something that you will have to still fight for or speak up for. It's not easy. So a lot of my students talk about this. A lot of my girl students are upset about the fact that they do not have the same liberty to go out at night or party as much as their brothers do, or have boyfriends as many as girlfriends the brothers can have. Those kind of issues are rampant and pretty often. I don't know how different it is from the West, even though I've studied at Harvard for a bit, but I really can't have that penetration into understanding the family cultures or across pan US or other countries to compare it honestly. But it exists, definitely exists in India. It's definitely a patriarch system. And yes, girls are studying. Yes, girls are doing all kinds of jobs. They are now in the armed forces, and but not all families are liberal, and not all of them look at it with the same eye.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And the other thing I know here in the States, we had a lot of conversations around Black Lives Matter and around race relations, but it also got us to examine other parts of the cultures as well. And definitely we know that Gandhi influenced Dr. King's philosophy way back in the 60s and everything. But we also know that to some degree, and I guess it still exists, India does have the caste system as well. So it does seem like there have been some issues even around class and race even there in India. And I imagine that that is still the case even in the 21st century. And I'm imagining that even your students bring that up as well, because I know that students love to engage in things to change society if they feel that there are injustices, whether that was Black Lives Matter here, or whether that's maybe attempts to kind of change the caste system there in India. And I don't know how prevalent it is, but I do know historically it was very prevalent.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. There's no denying it, Mark. And yes, it's a huge country. And yes, educating them and making them aware and getting them in some way, having enough NGOs to fight for their rights, or even educating the people who do not treat them well, despite being educated. It's an uphill task. I don't know where it will end or how it will end. And I know there are discrepancies all over the world. I do understand that, but caste system is as old as the Indus Valley itself. That's where the four sects in 3500 BC had begun. And there are some leaders, for example, the chief minister of New Delhi is a very enterprising person, and he's working, he has a very humanitarian approach towards everyone, being equal, sort of. And his party works, but we need a lot more governance and a lot more administrative practices by politicians on those grounds to work actively. On the contrary, what we are right now doing with our traditional leadership is we're using this as a political vote card. So you speak well for them, or you give them a subsidy or something, and you gain the votes for them, from them. It's a play card for them. Right. So it's sad the way things are. Yes.
No, and one of the other things that I know was very prevalent here, and I know that it's not just in India, but it's also in some of the South American countries, is that there is a whole like cottage industry, which is those kind of like call centers that exist. And I know it's been featured in movies, and a lot of times when you call the call centers, a lot of times they will be in either India or Brazil or some of the other countries. And I know that that is definitely a cottage industry that exists in India as well. And I don't know what the pay scales are like there, but I'm imagining that they're probably not getting paid wage scale, but that's just me guessing and everything. But I know that it even throws me off sometimes when I'm calling like for my maybe electric service or phone service, and somebody will roll over and it'll be definitely not somebody from North Carolina. It'll be somebody from over in your part of the world. And I'm going like, how are you even doing this call and everything? But then I realized there was a lot of that call center work that is very prevalent in that area. So I'm thinking that that's still a big business there in India, but you can clarify if it is or isn't.
No, absolutely. I hear you. So, what happened, Mark? Most of the developing nations, they grew. There are basically three sectors we divide in economy. One of them is agriculture. That's the first one. So right now, for example, US agriculture contributes something like 2 to 2.5% to your 17 or 18 trillion dollars economy, right? And so the second is manufacturing sector, and then the third one is service sector. So usually a country grows from agriculture to manufacturing and then to the service sector, and that's how they mature and develop as well. China went from agriculture to manufacturing, and it's manufacturing for literally the whole world for for the past decade or two now. India, because either it was an English-speaking community and China was not, that probably is the main fundamental reason which put us apart. And everybody in the West who wanted people to do that job at a far lesser wages, then looked at India instead of looking at other developing nations for valid reasons. Population was there, educated youth, English speaking. Perfect. Now, so what happened as a result is India jumped literally from an agricultural economy to service sector.
Oh,
So for the past more than half a dozen years, we have more than 50 to 56% of India's GDP contributed by service sector. And that goes all to the KPOs, BPOs, medical transcriptions, all those centers. I would not say that they are paid badly. Even a beginner or a 12th grader gets something like a 30 grand,
oh,
which is very decent living for a single person because most of the students are not really settled there yet. The problem right now, I would say, is the inflation that we are going through with whether it is Modi's government or it is the pandemic. We are literally at about 6 to 7% inflation.
wow.
Now, that's yes, it's killing. No, nothing, no fixed deposits, no kind of business can match that.
Mm-mm.
So I don't know where this is going to lead. We'll have to wait and see. But if I was to talk last year or a year back before that, I don't think the pay scales were bad. They were decent for starters. And those are not kind of jobs where you stay on in middle age.
Right.
They are the jobs mostly youngsters and students pick up and then they work around it.
No,
Does that?
definitely. No, that definitely answers the question. I was just curious about that. One of the other things that I was, and this is just me saying something that I have always thought was enjoyable, and maybe it's even what you did at your own service when you got married and everything. But one of the things that I've always enjoyed is the whole concept of an elephant in the wedding and all of that. And I know sometimes the elephant is replaced with a pony or something along those lines. But when my friend, and I'm on their board now, but when my friend was the rental coordinator for the Carolina Theater, I remember that there were a couple of folks that were of Indian American descent, and they definitely did that lavish wedding. And like I said, I've been single all my life, and I'm in my late 50s, so that may be the case forever. But I've always said that if I ever got married, whether it was to a person of that descent or not, that I thought that that would be a cool way to do it. It was the whole riding in on the elephant and the whole kind of that aspect. So I always thought that that was like one of those great romantic scenes and everything. So I don't know whether you had that with your husband or not, but definitely it always looked like a great scene whenever I would see that in society. So I don't know whether that was something that you got to enjoy yourself, or maybe that's just for a certain class of people and everything, but not knowing enough about the culture, I was sitting there going like, that really looks cool.
No, no. Elephants are pretty common and not very expensive, Mark. So whenever you want to get married, you should hop over. I'll be happy to have you over as well. And my husband came on a horse. Majority of them come on a horse, and you can afford an elephant. It's not out of reach for a common, average Indian. It's not a super expensive thing to go for. But we did not have a lavish wedding when you asked. In fact, both my husband and I did not take anything from our parents. So we started off by ourselves from a scratch. And I love that part of it because you know what you're capable of, and you know where you get.
Yeah, definitely. Well, like I said, that was just a thought that popped in my head. I did want to get to the book, and if you can share a little bit about the book and what the book is all about. It definitely sounds like it has a lot to do with our journeys, but also what we've been going through in this age and time and everything. So it sounds like it can be something that both people in India can relate to, but also your relatives here in the States as well can relate to it as well. So if you could share a little bit about that book, and at some point I'd also like to hear your thoughts about actually maybe we'll get to that before we get to the book, because the other thing that I know happens in society here is that a lot of times people admire the entrepreneurial nature of the Indian society, particularly those that have moved here and have become like first or second generation Indian Americans. But what I sometimes hear people complain about, which I understand the complaint, is the insulative nature of when they move to a town. Like I know here in North Carolina, Cary or maybe even Morrisville are popular towns that a lot of the Indian community kind of gathers at and stays together, and they don't do that much reaching into other parts of society. So I was wondering, when you've talked to people, and even when you were going to Harvard, is that was something that you saw a lot of, and did you find ways that you could actually maybe I won't say discourage, but also encourage learning about other cultures? Because I do know that sometimes when people move into a particular country that they're not as familiar with, they're automatically going to go and try to hang out with people that are of like culture, like mine. And I definitely understand that, but I know that sometimes that throws people off because they only see a certain culture in the work environment and they don't see them necessarily intermingling because they are living in insulated environments and kind of like those environments that are of their community. So I said, I get it. And even historically, that happened in the African American community where there were the historical Black Wall Streets. But unfortunately, politics and greed and other things got in the way, and those environments were destroyed. So, like I said, that was a whole political thing that happened with gentrification and racism and a number of other things. But I just wondering your thoughts about how certain cultures, and particularly India, but not just India, I could say the same thing maybe even about Koreans and Pakistanians and a number of others, but they do have a habit of sometimes insulating themselves. So I was just wondering your thoughts about that.
Right. So one of the good things that happened is my schooling was with the British.
Mm-hmm.
My teachers were British, and my father was also in Air Force. He was also a pilot. He was in the Indian Air Force. So we constantly moved, and I was taught by non-Indians, and I did not really have that stereotype that you probably would like to fit a lot of Indians in, and I understand where you're coming from. Yes, it does. I've seen that happen a lot, but I didn't have that problem. In fact, had lots of friends, and our professors did that. They mix you up with all kinds of countries, and then you end up working with them.
Right.
And yeah, became friends with my professor as well. So that's something that we don't do here. You don't go out for a drink with your professor, but you do it there.
Right.
And he invited me with his wife, and he invited me over for a meal. I went to New Hampshire to his home. It was a lovely experience, honestly. I don't think it was restrictive or limiting in any way. To take on your first question about the book. So the book, as I was trying to ramble on earlier as well, is about helping you overcome, or rather controlling in many ways, your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Because majority of the problems that we look at in our life are stewed by our mind.
Right.
It's because we get swayed or we get angry or we react or whatever happens. So the book is essentially, it's about 100 little over pages, very small book. I did keep a copy.
Yes.
It's very tiny, and very sober to go with. And it's just a step by step, like a baby walk, baby steps to help you overcome and understand who you are and take control over your mind. Otherwise, it seems like you're sitting in your car, but somebody else has the foot on the accelerator.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody says something, and boom, you fly this way. Somebody else does something to you, and you take a ride somewhere else. There are expectations, there are disappointments, there are attachments. So you're constantly sort of juggling between it. And that's what the book essentially does to you. It walks you through a very simple worded book, because initially I was writing it for my students. So it's very simple. And it walks you through saying, how do you take control over yourself? How do you not keep doing stuff that you regret?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What are some of the things that most surprised you as you were writing that book? Because as one that has had friends that have been authors, and I actually did, and one of my friends who is an artist turned one of my interviews into a book. So I guess technically speaking, I'm an author now as well, since I had to give him permission to let that transcript become a book and everything. But definitely, I know that Van Doren Hennon put that book out there and everything. So it's been out now less than a year, so maybe about 9 months or something like that. But definitely, I guess that technically makes me an author since it's got my name on it as the interviewer. But what are some of the life lessons that you learned from the book that surprised you?
I'm sorry. So let me rephrase. Get that again, if I've got you right. You want me
No,
to?
no problem. I was curious as to what some of the lessons that you learned from writing the book that surprised you, because I know all authors, as they are writing, are oftentimes surprised by something in their life. So, as you were writing the book, what are some of the aspects of the book that surprised you, even as you were coming up with these life lessons, for lack of a better term?
Right. Thank you for for rephrasing it. So yes, I think a lot of that was sort of a understanding in my head. Now putting it into black and white was very concrete and tangible. Um, I think it made me relate to people after writing the book a lot easier. Uh, Earlier, it used to be okay. Somebody says something, and you try to think out and say, okay, well, how can I manage this conversation in a way where I facilitate for the other person? Now it literally goes to, oh, chapter number this. Oh, so the problem comes from chapter number this or that, and this is what the person has is going through. It's literally kind of compartmentalized, if you say. The other thing is that it helped me transcend some of my thoughts in a more concrete fashion. Things sometimes on your head are intangible or subtle, and when you put them down, they're more concrete.
Right.
Those are two things I definitely noticed. I might have something else which I'm not aware of right now.
No problem. And actually, our good friend Miss Stephanie was writing some things that she had to say. So she said, in essence, it's every cause has an effect. If you don't like the cause, don't produce the effect, which is sometimes harder than it seems. But if we don't allow ourselves to be taken in or go with that flow or train of thinking, then we can overcome a lot of these misconceptions that we have about our fellow human beings. So definitely I would agree with her on that, because all the times we do have those various misconceptions that agree out there, and definitely a lot of that cause and effect kind of mentality does exist and everything. So I can definitely agree with her thoughts about that. So glad that she was giving us her thoughts about what she was hearing in regards to lessons learned and things along those lines. But I can definitely relate to just kind of the ways that you were saying the different things that you learned even as you wrote and everything. I was actually going to get to another part of your bio and everything, which is the fact that, and I remember this historical movie, I think was had The Great Debater, I think was the title of it, but it was about a debate club. And I know that you've done debating as well. So I was just wondering, as an academic person, but also a debater, what are some of the tools from debating that have helped you in your own life, whether that's in your family life with your husband, or if y'all have kids with the kids, or just in terms of work in general? What are some of the things that you learned from being a debater? And I'm thinking that this was even in your young ages and everything that you did that have impacted and helped you in your growth and continued growth as a person.
Yes, Mark, absolutely. One thing that it has tremendously helped me do is win all the arguments with my husband. That's been the best part of it. Okay, now he tells me when I argue about something with him, he says, "Oh, you were a debater, so get off it. I mean, whatever. You've got answer for everything, or you've got a something to come up with everything." The way it has structured my thinking and helped me work through life, and to a lot of my students, the way I've been able to hopefully help them is, I literally work out an Excel sheet where I put down, here are my perspectives. Mm-hmm. And then I go on to do research from the other side, the opponent side, and say, these are the possible rebuttals that the other person will come with. And what are the possible then rebuttals that I can come up with? And then what else can that other gentleman or lady come up with? So it's pretty much like turning around the coat and wearing it from both sides constantly, mm-hmm. which helps you empathize from other person's perspective, A, and B, also helps you see everything that might be thrown at you, and you're ready for it, or sort of, you already know what's happening or likely to happen, not that you completely control it, but you know what's likely to happen. So it helped me research from both ends to be a good debater, and to figure that out. That was my strategy with it.
Well, two things. One, I've had conversations with other folks that were debaters, and yes, you're right. Your husband is right. It's probably next to impossible to win those arguments because y'all already have a unfair advantage and everything. But one of the things I was curious about, and I was going to ask you this as well, is I've got a friend of mine who does another show here on this network, Barbara H. Smith, and she is a business coach. So she does a lot of business coaching and teaches people about speaking and their speaking habits and all of that. But we were actually having a conversation not that long ago on one of the other shows about our politicians, and I imagine the same as Indian politicians as well. So as one that is both a debater and a journalist, are you oftentimes shocked at how bad our politicians are in those categories? Because I've watched some of the debates and I'm sitting there going like, I'm just amazed that y'all are like breaking all the basic rules of debating and things along those lines. So as one that has done debating, and I'm sure that Modi is probably just as guilty, even though I don't know him personally and I don't really follow Indian news as much as I probably should. But as one that has been in those fields, and you're shaking your head, so I'm thinking that yes, you were just amazed at some of their bad habits. So I'd love to hear you elaborate on that, because I know
horrid. They're horrid, Mark. They're absolutely horrid. They're uneducated. They suck at public speaking. They're just ridiculous. And I'm sorry, I don't know whoever said that being a tea stall owner and therefore being a prime minister is a great idea. I don't even know how that qualifies for being a prime minister. Look at the governance that we have in this country right now. That should qualify for, validate or rather invalidate that stand. I'm sorry. I don't know what it is. There's something about Indian politicians which requires age. People are not ready to accept younger, more dynamic, educated people. And I don't think even the youngsters are interested to get into it because it becomes such a dirty game as it is. So there's a gap here in our country, which I don't know what is going to fill up. There are a very good stream of people who don't want to be a part of politics. And politicians are people with bad reputation, corrupt practices, poor education, horrible public speaking.
Well, I hate to tell you this, it's not much better in the United States either. So we've had some very bad politicians that have done horrible.
Nothing compares to India. Nothing compares to India. Trust me. You have to watch the Parliament House one of the days and the pandemonium that they create over there to only begin to scratch on what it is. Nothing compares to India. None of them. You guys are far better. Trust me.
You're blessed. You on that and everything. And it is probably much better. I know that one of the founders of the network, and I actually mentioned his name earlier, Nek Palveda, he oftentimes talks about his fears of our education system. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about this from a global standpoint. And he's actually talking about the United States education, but he feels that we are in the 21st century. There's no doubt about that. We're in the year 2021, but he feels that some of our ways that we teach are still stuck in the 18th century. And maybe even in India, they might be stuck in the 17th century. But I was just wondering your thoughts about that. Do you feel that sometimes globally we're not doing enough to encourage our kids academically? Because I know what he's talking about is the United States, and he's talking about the fact that there was a time that we used to teach our kids about vocational jobs and definitely home economics and things of that nature. And those courses have fallen by the wayside and are not encouraged as much. And definitely we're not even seeing enough work, in my mind, in the STEAM fields and in some of the creative fields as well. And of course, he's got the background of being a pension fund person. So he's actually does laws around pensions. So he would love to see more financial literacy. And of course, a lot of times we don't even know how to balance our budgets and do things along those lines. So I was just wondering, from a global perspective, do you think that we're doing a good job of encouraging our kids to learn the world that they are about to face?
If you want me to respond to that as a holistic figure for the way the world education is, not really. We suck at it. And I think there are essential characters or things that a human being requires. For example, being a parent or getting into relationships or managing financial literacy, as you said, everything from bank accounts to stock market or understanding how you would do in business. And none of that is really taught to us in a traditional education pattern. I could ponder a little while or a bit on what I'm doing here so usually we rank in, we've got thousands and thousands of institutions. And we are lucky in most of the surveys. I will not name the brand because I don't want to market or anything here, but I'll just talk about the pedagogies. So usually we rank in the top 50, 60, 70, or at least in the top 100 of the country. And some of the things that I do, Mark, or we do as a team, as a matter of fact, is take on a lot of hands-on practical work for everybody. So, for example, there's a course in which is called Masters in International Business, and these students have to take out a consignment abroad, find a B2B, owner, even if it's $100 sample consignment. They'll have to book it in a 20-feet container. They'll have to do the bank documents. They'll have to draw the LOC. They'll have to do the whole thing. They'll get it across. When they get the money back at the bank, that's when the grading begins. We understand that they understood the entire documentation in the process. Or if it is hotel management students, they'll actually run a restaurant. They'll run a real, they'd run a real restaurant. They run a real bakery. They run a real laundry. And it's the whole building is built like a mock hotel. So every day they're practically doing stuff that they need to. And by the time I think these students go to my second year, they earn their own fees, second semester, because they have plenty of opportunities to earn from what they're doing. There's tourism. They do their own. They make the passports. I think within my college campuses, we do about 100 trips, both international and domestic. And they all itineraries and trips are all done by the tourism students. Wow. So what I'm essentially arriving at is, there's no point taking 15 departments, that each student, like an MBA, a regular MBA, has to form a company. And that might sound like obsolete idea for somebody in US. In India, you will have to go through 30 to 35 offices to register a company.
Wow.
Not just the banks, not just your taxes, not just your, the registration, the license, the name, registrar. There are so many of them. Pollution board control, if you're into manufacturing. There are offices and offices that you need to still walk through. And everyone needs to register a company. Everyone needs to learn to pay the tax. Everyone needs to go through practical financial literacy, then return their taxes, then learn how to close and exit the company in the first semester itself. So everything that we are doing, essentially, even an undergraduate will have to run a consumer hub of sorts, to understand, do focus groups, learn what somebody would buy and why they would buy it, and then go on to sell it, and then come back to do the project presentation to help the teacher discuss what they understood from their research and what actually worked. So a whole lot of practical work, basically, an array of it, from every field, so that the students learn what they're going to go and apply. And then what we do is we send the students out once a week throughout the entire final year to work in the industry. I'm lucky to be based out of a very industrial town in Punjab. So every child goes out once a week to work within industry. So they understand what corporate culture is, what professionalism is, how do you groom yourself, how do you dress, how do you introduce, how do you do a bunch of things, which otherwise is a huge shock when you first time, just get in, or you go for internships. And you'll be shocked to hear this. So we actually have to do audits on internships, because a lot of Indian institutions, you would have gone for an internship and you never actually may go to work. And you may come back after 2 months and say, or 6 months and say, oh, I've done it. But you probably went to a relative or a friend's company and said, oh, I've done it, but you've never really done anything. So there's a lot of vigilance required, a lot of hard work and love required, I would say, if you want to call it that. But also putting in your head into each department and saying, how do we do that? How do journalism students work actively through the studio, make YouTube videos, run a channel? How do you actually break that profession firsthand? And when you get into the field out there, there's no gap. It shouldn't be that, the industry says, what the hell have you sent us? Well, they don't know first thing about it. Why are they here? That should never be the case.
Yes,
so that's what my endeavor is.
Yes, interesting you bring that up, because that's one of the things that I know that we wanted to see more of in the West, and particularly in the United States, that I don't know we see enough of. Because as you were describing that, and I was thinking to myself that would be great if we saw more, and I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but if we saw more like workers that after they got their degree, came back to the universities and actually did more direct work with the students and the kind of description of what you're given that your university does and things of that nature. Because I don't know that we see enough of that. And I know that even sometimes when people quote unquote make it, and sometimes they've made it out of hardships, meaning that made it out of poor neighborhoods and things of that nature. The complaint that we sometimes hear from society is that they wish that some of those people would use that old phrase of reach back and grab one. So basically try to help them do what they did. And a lot of times people kind of like go into the next class, whatever that class may be, if we're going to look at it on a class aspect, and kind of like leave their past neighbors, their past people behind and everything, and don't do enough of that reach back. So it sounds to me that at least in that regards with your university is more of that kind of action. And I definitely wish that we saw more of that here in the United States as well. And I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I definitely feel that it could happen more than it is happening, because I think too often people go into the jobs and they might have come from certain environments, but they don't go back and help other people get out of those same environments that they got out of. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about my comments on that.
No, I agree with it totally, and I think we all need more of it. Even while we're doing it, I still feel there's a lot more to do. I totally empathize, and I resonate with everything you're saying about this.
No, I definitely agree, and I can see that being something that we need to do more of and all of that. You were educated there in Harvard, and I was just wondering, when you went to Harvard and went to Boston, and of course, Boston has its own history, including some racial history that people forget about and everything. But I was just wondering your thoughts of Harvard, the institution, as well as Boston, now that you've had a chance to be back home and probably even reflect on your education when you were there. So I was just wondering some of your thoughts on being in, one of the, definitely one of the top 5 institutions in the country and everything. So I was just wondering your thoughts about being in that environment, and maybe some of the lessons that you learned or some of the things that surprised you about both the United States in general and Boston in specifics.
Right. No, it did not surprise me. It was a very delightful surprise. It's wonderful being at Howard, and equally, even better, I would say, being at Boston. I have never been to, I had been to US before I went to study. And I have never, and even after that, I've been about 3 or 4 times. I still have never seen a city like Boston. It's filled with intellectuals, with lakes, with beauty, both inside and out. People are very patient. People are, there's so many universities, so many publishing houses. And it's kind of very evident in the nature of the city. So it's not just Harvard. I think the whole city is, by and large. I mean, people don't even consider Boston University or Lesley or one of those to be anything big, because big stalwarts like MIT and Harvard and all these are standing there. But honestly, it's filled with lovely universities, and education is predominant because of both the publishing houses and the universities. And I think that is what changes the genre of the city. So it's very evident as compared to New York or even LA to some extent. The very sophisticated people, and I love the city. Honestly, the music on the street, everything. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it is definitely a beautiful city. I've had a relative that actually went to Boston University. So yeah, my cousin Monique went up there. I want to say that's where she met her husband Troy at while they were at Boston University. And I've had some other friends that have gone there as well. So it's not just Harvard, even though I've known some people that have either gone to school there or taught at Harvard. But definitely that is a great area, and I would agree with you on that. One of the things I was curious about is when you think about journalism, and you're definitely in the journalism field and have been there before, and of course you're now in the academic field, and of course when you're doing this work and thinking about the future of journalism, a lot of times we see in more and more kind of the creations of what this network is, which is kind of a online streaming network using things like StreamYard and using other kind of parts of the platform, whether it's Facebook or YouTube or a number of other things going on. And of course we see a lot of people expressing their thoughts, including their political thoughts and maybe even their journalistic thoughts through blogs and through Facebook posts and through a number of other things. So as one that has been in the field and is also an academic, where do you see the future of journalism? Because right now it seems to be very democratized, because a lot of times people can, create their own networks, they can create their own situations. A lot of people are having the harder time with the monetization part of doing that, but definitely you can create your own whatever's, and it's definitely had a great democratization of our voices. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, because that can be a double-edged sword, because it can definitely give us a lot of thoughts and a lot of avenues, but then a lot of people aren't necessarily getting paid out of it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about the new journalism and the new direction of journalism.
Mark, I was reading this yesterday, a little animation where a young daughter is asking her mother that why are people so sad? And the mother goes, because there are too many fake people spreading too many fake news, sharing so much fake feelings that they have lost a bit of their soul.
Well,
So, honestly, I think everyone's become a journalist. From the time, I mean, I was a reporting journalist like a dozen years back. Technology has boomed, social media has exponentially grown, and I believe everyone has become a journalist. There is no way of knowing what news you are getting over WhatsApp or Facebook or Instagram. There's so many platforms. Let's say Clubhouse. Back to our where we met.
right,
Um, you have no idea what you're hearing all the time,
right,
what part of it is credential and what credentials it has, and what how authentic it is.
right.
So at the end of the day, you probably end up hearing how forcefully or how good a communicator a person is and how well they deliver it.
Mhm.
It's sad the way things are, and I think everyone requires to practice a lot of acumen and understanding what they're absorbing and what they're consuming before making up their mind, which is a very difficult task for the consumer today of any kind of news. Bewitching, I would call it,
Yeah.
but it's bemusing
Yeah.
times.
And
Yes,
to add
for
to that, and that even comes back to where we met at and everything, is even within the Clubhouse environment, there's also all kinds of things that happen within that that get you puzzled, and at the same time wondering about them. Like, I know that I've had conversations in both this platform, because I've had a couple of the Clubhouse people on, as well as on other platforms, about the whole concept of, who's allowed to speak, who's not allowed to speak, why you need to have 20 or 30 moderators. Because I've done conferences and I've done debates, and I know that in the old-fashioned way of doing it, you were doing good if you had like maybe two or three on stage and maybe one or two out in the audience to help with the handling of questions. But we know in that environment that we met and everything, there have been cases where there might be 50 or 60. And I get part of that is because of the spread of the nations and the spread of the fact that you want people to all get their time. And if it's like a long room that might be as doing a marathon, then I might get 50 or 60. But there are other times that I've gone into rooms and I'm seeing 50 or 60 moderators, and I'm going like, how can you have 50 or 60 moderators and 5 people that are in the audience? That does the dichotomy or the portions don't make any sense to me, and things along those lines. And I know there are also those lovely engagement rooms which can help you network and help you build up some strong networks. But then you also wonder how much of that is actually true engagement. Because to me, engagement means that you are going to continue the relationship. Like I said, I invited you here. You're on the show now, and I would love us to continue the friendship and maybe even have your husband on at some point, but do continual kind of things and not just be a one-stop shop. Whereas a lot of times in the engagement rooms, they're asking you to follow, you're supposed to follow back. And I wonder sometimes how much true engagement is there, or is it a lot of surface talk? So definitely, I just wonder some of your thoughts on what you have observed.
Mark, when I met you at the Clubhouse, I was just probably joined then. So I'm like about a month old or 5 weeks old Clubhouse. And yes, the past week I had off from work for some reasons at home, and I did get to spend quality time in Clubhouse. And I kind of empathize with everything you're saying. I don't know what that is. Is it ego
Yeah.
that people need to host and prove and moderate and sort of have this power to say who goes in and who goes out? Or I have no idea what that is. Um, Well, I would only say each to his own.
Right.
And I've been to a bunch of houses, and I do know what you're saying, and I understand I agree with you. Yes,
Yeah, and I
but
definitely have seen that even with new people that have come in. And like I said, I became friends with one of the person that apparently sometimes you can speak too much of your truth, because I know that in one case, somebody that was relatively well known spoke too much of their truth and they got banished for a little bit. Now they're back and they have their house and everything back. But I know that they were put out because they made some comments about COVID and other things that are going on in society. And I'm sure that they probably might have had some theories that were outside of what people consider the norm, and because of that, they were told they had to be off of it for a while. I was glad to see them as recently as the last time I was on, because I didn't go on yesterday, so it might have been 3 or 4 days ago that I saw that they were back and that their team was back as well. But I do know that there's a lot of that kind of stuff that goes on also that I have never quite got the hang of or understood. But like I said, it's their platform, and hopefully they will get it and get it to work in, because I know for a long time I was not on it, because I'd heard about Clubhouse some time back, but they weren't Android friendly. And I have an old Android phone, an old kind of old worn out Android phone, and not an iPhone. So I was going like, well, I guess I'll get there whenever they go Android. And so they went Android. I had not been on there that much longer than you. So like I said, if you've been on a month, I've probably been on maybe 2.5 months, because it was after they made that Android announcement. So I remember getting the little Android, the beginner's symbol that you get when you first come on and everything, and then that going off, and even being asked to moderate a couple of times myself and everything. But like I said, those times that I did it, it was in smaller rooms, and I don't mind moderating if there are just a
yeah,
few moderators. But when there are lots of moderators and I can't figure out the reason, and then I'm going like, I just don't get it whatsoever. As one that is talking to your kids about social media, whether it's Clubhouse or whether it's other platforms, what do you warn them about social media? Because I know I was talking to another guest. I've actually talked to a couple of guests about this, and we were talking about the importance of social media. Like, I'm a big fan of activism and activism in our community. I think that our kids, and particularly the young generation that are in their 20s and 30s, have done fantastic causes in terms of being activists, whether that's around orientation issues, whether that's around climate change, like what the young lady in the European country did and everything, or whether that's around Black Lives Matter and race relations or women's rights or a number of other things. And I remember seeing a documentary that talked about their voice and their voice being powerful. And I agree that our young people have a very powerful voice. But the other thing that it said about that was how they get caught up in the light culture, and they've got to be approved constantly and have to be getting that affirmation from their peers, and even sometimes people that are their peers that are in other generations. So as one that is in that academic space and talking to these young people as a somebody that is influencing their lives as a professor and everything, what do you tell them, and how do you engage them to use the tool but not get overbearing by that tool? Because as you mentioned earlier about the person that had committed suicide, and I do know that depression is a serious issue and among our young people and all of that. So then social media plays a part in that depression sometimes. So I was just wondering your thoughts as to how you deal with that when you're talking to your kids.
right. I no, I totally hear you, and I understand where you're coming from, Mark. Um, Let me start by saying, I don't. I've got two boys now who are in the college. So, in fact, as I speak, it's my young one's birthday. So, happy birthday to him. He's not here at home with us today. Um, and one thing that I've done, not just about social media, about parenting, I would say, is not tell them no. I don't tell them no. I don't try to block them ever since they were children. And the reason why I don't do that is because I believe that till they are sitting outside and they're curious about something which is going on anywhere, whether it is ice cream or Coke when they were very little, or it is some sort of social media today, till they're sitting outside and wondering what the hell is going on inside, that mystery makes it really bigger than what it really is. So I've noticed that with that approach, usually they would start with something get over with it, and then be done with it, and then move on to something else, rather than staying stuck outside and saying, "Oh my God, I don't know, everybody else is doing it. God knows what's inside this," you know, something that I'm not allowed to do.
Yeah.
So that approach I never took up. I encourage them, whatever they're curious about, to go and experiment with it, including having a liquor drink. Try it, figure it out, fine. And then if you like it or how much you like it, then the good thing is when you don't do too many no's. The only time I want to tell a small child no is when he's about to poke his finger into the electric plug. I know that's going to cause it. If you even have a sore throat and you want to have ice cream, have the whole slab for the dinner, and get on. Be sick, you'll get over it.
Right.
So it's like get over things, and that's how I feel about life. The other thing that helps me then do is remain a friend.
Mm-hmm.
So because there's this too much of no dialogue, so we remain friends. And when we remain friends, then I am this cushion that they can come back to whenever they have a problem. And as a friend also, then we love to talk to each other and hang out a lot. So instead of saying don't do it, I went and introduced my elder one, who just returned from US, was not aware of the clubhouse. He'd heard about it, but he'd never been on it. So I talked about his couple of interests, and I said, "Do you know there are rooms there where you could talk to people across the globe? And I think it's a great idea if you want to hop on." So now he would go experiment, and there's no taboo with it. And I personally feel that my boys have, I don't know if this is a nice way of putting it, but I think they're way maturer than most of their age group, because they're allowed to look at everything, whatever it is. They don't look at girls or liquor or social media or anything as a taboo, because that is a very bad way of dealing with the heart, where you say, "Oh, this is something which is quarantined from me," or it's a taboo for me, and therefore God knows how big this thing is. That I've not done. So it's helped me a lot, parent, and I talk about this very often with my friends if it helps them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I like that way that you handle everything with the kids and everything. And I know that even as a youngster myself, definitely I remember going to parties that my parents were having, maybe playing cards. It might have been Bid Whiz or something like that. And I remember that was my first time having a sip of an alcohol drink, because I think that they were like, "Here, try it." And there was their way of getting it, so some degree maybe out of your system and everything of that nature. And while I went to Milwaukee Marquette, and that's definitely a drinking school, and probably had a little bit more drinks than I needed when I was there, but I would definitely just now am only a social drinker, and like I said, maybe go out to an environment or something like that. But I'm thinking that first sip that I had as a kid and everything, and like I said, I think it was either mom or dad. It might have been both of them. They were like, "Here, you're being curious and going to be a curious kid. You might as well try it right now." As I recall the experience, like I said, they may have a different take on my memory, because our memories are always different based on who's given the memory. But that's how I remember it, and how I'm going to keep the story going as long as I can and everything, because that's what I remember it as being, and all of that. I'm also thinking, as I'm watching you and hearing your comments and everything, and I was wondering your take on this, but I'm thinking that your two boys and everything, that when it comes to having a discussion with their parents and everything, I'm thinking that they probably go to your husband more than they go to you, because they know that you are a professor, a journalist, and a former debater. So I'm thinking that they probably do not go to you that much, because they, like you were talking about your husband and the debate principles, I'm thinking that they know that they would lose to you as well. So am I correct in that perception, that they might go to your husband more than they go to you, because they're afraid that you're already going to have like a line of different points and counterpoints, and they know that they can probably get by quicker on him than they can you, based on your history and everything? Or is that a misconception on my part?
No, you're right. They do go to my husband a lot as well, and he's also an academician. So he's a PhD in marketing, and he's a director of one of the institution itself. But being a liberal mother, it's never been a blockage. So it's never been a barrier. We do communicate a lot. We hang out a lot, and open to trying everything. So we travel a lot together, and a bunch of things.
No, that's one
And
of the things I loved about you and my mom and dad is they are both jazz fans and things of that nature. I'm both a jazz and a blues fan, but I remember going to different events, and there would be my dad at the event. He's also an artist and a photographer now, so it doesn't surprise me to be in an event with him. But I'm sure that it might have thrown off some of my friends and maybe even some of my social dating situations because they're going like, "Wait a minute, do we always have to run into your parents when we're at these events and everything?" And it's probably more common with dad than it is with mom because mom lives in a different town, even though in the same state. But there are times that I do remember going to different events and running into one or both of them, and it was just accepted. And the same with my younger brother because we had some similar likes and tastes. And I remember that when there was a club called Talk of the Town, it would be nothing for us both to be at the same place because we both enjoyed that environment. But I'm sure that some of my friends and peers might have been like, good grief, do we have to bump into your family all the time? So I'm sure that might even happen with your kids as well. So I'm wondering, does that happen? And or how, coming to that same thought, how important do you feel it is for us to have a cultural connection, for that meaning to us to look at art, to look at music, to look at different things, whether it's of our own culture, meaning in your case, it would be like, of course, Indian music, Bollywood music, the sitar, the instrument, but also learning other people's culture and just being engaged in the arts. How important do you think it is for us as humans to have that cultural connection?
um, well, I think we've by and by become multi-global.
Hmm.
There's a lot of local in even at the multinational level. India, Mark, is more like a continent, and
Right,
so are you. But only to say that if I was to go down to any of half a dozen states, let's say down south,
right.
I would not understand anyone's language.
Mhm.
I will not understand a word of what they're saying. I do not know their food. I do not know their costumes, at least the traditional ones.
Right.
And having 28 of those is pretty intimidating in a way to understand culture. So, yes, within your own state, you may be able to fathom because you live in it,
Right.
breathe and eat in it, and you understand through stories and folklores a little bit of that. But saying as at a level of the country as India,
Mhm.
I think it's too much to fathom, too much to conquer, too much to register for anyone. And even for us. So for me, for example, going to Pakistan, the other side of Punjab, there's a Punjab there also.
Right.
We share the same language, the same stories, history, and food and everything. But if I go down 2 states down south or towards northeast, I would be like, so if you go to northeast, there's Mongolian features or Chinese
Mhm.
features. If you go down south, it's Dravidian features. We here in this part of north are Aryans. There are different ethnicities, different languages, different food, multiple languages. Oh, it's a it's a different. It's nothing like any other country in that way. So culture is very varied and not easy to talk about.
No, I understand. And one of the things that always fascinates me, and you just alluded to it sometimes, is that on the continent of India, I know that there are multiple languages, and I'm sitting there going like, I'm having a hard enough time with English and some of the slang languages. But I know that one of my friends that lived, I want to say maybe in New Delhi or one of the other parts of India, was telling me about the various languages. And when he mentioned the amount of languages in India, I'm going like, okay, that would be hard because I'm probably going to be running into folks that are speaking multiple languages, and I'm not even sure how the school system works in that regards because I've heard that it's I can't remember how many. Something was definitely in the teens, if not around like 50 or 60 languages, but it was a whole bunch of various languages. And while there may be some similarities to the languages, there are also some vast differences. And I know that I heard the same thing because we have a show that's in based out of Nigeria, and I've heard the same thing about Nigeria that they've got a whole lot of languages as well. So any of these countries that have got anywhere from 50 to 60 to 70 languages, I'm going like I'm having a hard enough time with English and maybe some of the slang versions of English and the foreign languages in my growing up years and my schooling years were my Achilles heel. So I had a hard enough time trying to learn Spanish and French. And, once we get past au revoir and adios, I probably can't do much more than that in terms of my speaking of those languages and all of that. So I just don't know how y'all even manage with those multiple dialects and languages.
Bon, monsieur. So, yes. So, what essentially happens in India is every student learns one local language, which is the same for the entire state or the province, which means there are 28 of them at least. And then they learn one Hindi, which is the national language.
Right.
By the way, it's not everywhere. Like Tamil Nadu, state down south, has banned Hindi. Most of the South Indians hate Hindi. I must tell you that. And then, of course, English is mandatory. So 3 languages, which is pretty common with European students as well. They learn between French, Italian, Spanish, or whatever, or German or Greek or whatever. They usually have 2 to 3 languages as well. 2 languages besides English is very common. So I think that's normal here as well. And it's not looked upon as something unique. 3 languages is common. If you look at the resume of a profile or a student, 3 languages would be absolutely comfortable. I'm going to ask you, is it okay for me to switch off the video for a minute and transfer to charging card while you take the next question? Would that be okay?
Yeah, that's good. Or actually, I was getting ready to tell you that I was getting ready to wrap it up in, I don't know how much charger you've got, but I was getting to wrap up in the next 10 minutes or so anyway. So it depends on if you got enough to last 10 minutes. I was going to wrap up everything shortly.
Not sure. If it blinks in between, it would be bad. So while you take the next question, I'll just, I'm listening to you.
Okay.
And I will put it, to switch my seat. Would that?
All right. That's perfectly fine and everything. Definitely, I'm glad to do that. One of the things I was going to do as we were talking to Harbert and definitely having a great conversation and looking forward to a little bit more of the conversation continuing. One of the things that I was curious about and which I was going to ask her about is, all of the shows, we always ask our guests to share their socials, share how they can be reached in terms of that social environments, and being in Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, or a number of the other sorts of things along those lines. And of course, we always ask our guests, as it is a global network, to share their words of encouragement, their words of positivity, the words of things that they would like to share with our global community. And of course, I would love to have Harbert come back, because I do know that we're having a great conversation and I am thoroughly enjoying the conversation and definitely look forward to have many more and all of that. So I see that you've switched, and that's a great thing. But one of the things I was saying is that I wanted people to be able to just maintain, keeping in touch with you and everything. So definitely one of the things I was going to ask was your social media outlets and how people can reach you through social media. I know that you're on LinkedIn, but if there are Instagram handles or Facebook, and I think you are on Facebook, or other ways that people can reach you, then that's one of the things that I was looking forward to having folks hear and all of that. And then there's a question that we ask pretty much all of our guests, and that's one that I was sharing as well. But any social media that you would like to share, we'll go from there.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. Yes, I'm there. It's Harpreet K. Khan. That's the handle for Instagram. And that's that name, not as all well connected, but that's also the name that goes on Facebook. And I don't know, I'm not on Snapchat or anything. It's too much for me. But we are on Clubhouse, so we're connected there. And it's the same name, Harpreet K. Khan, as is mentioned here under my profile.
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing that I was saying is one of the things that as I said, I asked all my guests, and I have thoroughly enjoyed us talking, and hopefully we'll have to get you back to continue this dialogue and continue this conversation, because I always love having people back, as I call it, consider any of the shows that I am part of people's digital home. So just like we have those digital homes with Clubhouse or some of the environments, this is another digital home. So if there's things that you want to share with our audience any time that you want to bring them up, whether it's around political things going on in India or around the globe, or just concerns that you have, or about education or some of the other things that we've talked about, this is definitely a home for you and yours are always welcome. So that invitation goes not just to you, but to also your husband and your sons as well, and anybody else that is in your circle of acquaintances that you might want to share the platform with. But one of the things I always ask my guests is to give their words of encouragement. Because like I said, I know we have shows out of South Africa, we have shows out of Nigeria, we have speakers that come from places like Australia and New Zealand. Actually, one of the co-founders of the network, Ankit, actually lives in India, and his company is actually Watermark and everything, because he always teases me about having my name within the name of his company and everything. And definitely he's there in India, and we've also got folks from Switzerland, England, and around the globe. So any words of positivity or encouragement that you want to share with folks, this is that opportunity to do that.
Right, Mark. That's very well said. Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting my family over. I would love to extend you the same.
Okay.
And I mean it offline as well.
Right.
We'd love to have you and your family over. We'd love to host you. We live in a suburb area with a big farmhouse. And it'll be lovely to have you. I can see we can easily get chatting and we can talk for hours. So that's brilliant. There you go. To say what a message would be, I would say something that I've also put in the first initial chapters of the book, that one needs to learn to look at life without labels.
Mm.
You know, every time I've spoken to anyone and said, who are you? Or could you tell me a little bit about yourself? Or could you describe yourself? All I hear is name, religion, country, educational institutions, you know, and people can't seem to see themselves or the roles that they play, father, sister, wife. They can't seem to see who they truly are beyond all that.
Mm.
And that's rather sad, because we seem to be blinded with these labels. It's like people want to sell whatever they want to sell, whether it's an educational institution or a country, whatever it is, but it's kind of limiting the rest of the human race in understanding of the true self. So I would encourage everyone to go beyond.
No, I definitely agree with you. And it's interesting you say that as we're closing out and everything, because I sometimes feel that we do become too caught up in the surface and identify ourselves, that you just said, by whatever our race, ethnicity is, or our gender or orientations, and even our jobs, because a lot of times the person will tell you, I'm a fireman or I'm a policeman or whatever, and we don't really get to know the essence of the person. And I think that that's when it's really good to have these kind of engaging conversations. I know just recently I was talking to a friend of mine in I think they're in the San Diego or Sacramento area of California, and we were on the phone for like 3 or 4 hours, and the conversation was going into all kinds of different directions, and I don't even think we realized how much time had passed until, you know, I looked at the clock or the computer, and I'm like, wait a minute, it's 4 a.m. and we're still talking. So I might want to get some rest and everything. So definitely, when you're having those kind of engaging conversations, it's a wonderful thing. But I think that too often we find barriers to stop us from having those conversations, even in our own families and in our own lives. I know that one of the shows that I do, I call it the Online Dinner Party. And it's kind of like, the reason I gave it that title is I was reflecting on when my parents would have those card games that also included dinner and some of those things, and definitely some of the things that my aunt and uncle would do. So I would miss that kind of environment, because to me, an online dinner party is you're inviting your friends in, you're fixing or you've already fixed the meal, and y'all are sitting there chatting and having a good conversation. And definitely it can be everything from the serious, like politics, to the sublime, like you might be talking in India about the latest cricket match, or here we might be talking about football and things of that nature. But it's just that fun and engaging conversation that I feel we don't have enough of. And I'm glad that you are encouraging that even in your book and everything. So if you could give people, and maybe show them one more time, the title of the book before if you have it handy. If you don't have it handy, don't worry about it. You can just tell them the title of the book and everything, and definitely where they can find it. I'm imagining it on Amazon and things along those lines. And then I'll put a advertisement for a couple of the other shows that exist here on the neighborhood. I mean, on the network, and then hit in broadcast. But definitely tell folks once again the title of the book and how they can find it.
It's called I Am, I-A-M-M. That's it. And it's available on all Amazon. In fact, it's available on most book sellers online, both a paperback and a Kindle copy or a digital copy. So if anybody is intrigued by what it provides, I don't think it's a book which speaks to a lot of people, because not many of them want to take that journey. But if it speaks to you, you're very welcome.
Well, I hope it does speak to people. I'm looking forward to getting my copy. I'm going to see if I can find it on Kindle, because I just got a friend's book on Kindle that was actually about one of the great business leaders and all of that. So they had written some of the life lessons that they learned from that business leader. And definitely Brian Shulman and others were featured in that book. So I know I've downloaded that, and I downloaded a book that my friend Tim Stone is involved in that talks about social media and all of that. So I'm going to see if your book is available on Kindle as well, since I've got a Kindle account. So hopefully I'll be adding your book to reading also. So definitely great to have you on, and look forward to having you back on in the near future. I know one of our other shows is The Lawyer's Den, so I'm going to bring that up, as well as The Gamer's Den, which I think this ad says is at 1 o'clock, but actually the day is right. It is on Thursdays, but it's actually at noon, because we realized that was lunchtime for a lot of people. So it was easier to grab a bigger audience at lunchtime. So if you see 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, it's actually at noon. The rest of them, I think, are correct, like the time for The Lawyer's Den. But I'm going to bring that up and then hit in broadcast. But I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation and look forward to having many more.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor. Totally.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
No problem.
Take care. Enjoy your